off, we are going to be tackling something that's been in the NFL news for a minute now, and that is the current running back market. It's no joke with the running back market in the last several years. The position has kind of been devalued a little bit. And there's been a lot of talk about these running backs kind of talking with each other about what's going on and trying to make sure they get their fair value. And we just had a Jonathan Taylor trade request to coincide with all this. So, I mean, guys, listen, we've known the running back market's been kind of devalued for a while, but now it feels like it's at an all-time tipping point.
Yeah, and I think it all really does kind of go back to, like, gosh, what draft was it, Ryan? Was it 2013 when there wasn't a single running back taken the first round? And, like, everybody kind of really blew up with that, right? And I think, like, it started there. And then I think there were a couple drafts there where the running back talent just wasn't quite there, right? And I think that exacerbated the mentality of the running back position where, like, you think about the like an Eddie Lacy was, like, you know, one of the top running backs drafted, right? A Gio Bernard, who was even a good player but kind of limited. I think that those guys kind of really showed the cracks of running backs because those guys, they were able to get good years out of those guys, despite them guys themselves not being all that good, all that useful. And I think then we saw for years and years and years, teams would pay these running backs and then they'd fall apart immediately, you know. Zeke is really like the final example of that. And so I think teams are just looking at this and saying, well, why should we keep on paying you if your future production is not good? And I think, you know, I don't know what the answer is for these running backs. I just don't know if there even is one. Their best years, and look, we see it as fantasy players every year, right? Like, there's a reason why we constantly are saying don't draft 28-year-old running backs and above. It's because the cliff can hit at any moment on those guys. And so, you know, we aren't paying them the money. We're just simply saying, well, they're just not going to be very productive. Versus they're paying them the money and then they're not productive. It reminds me a little bit of what we saw in baseball shortly after the Albert Pujols contract, where we then saw free agency really stall out, you know, for a while. I mean, even think about like a Bryce Harper and a Manny Machado. They both had to wait till like January of their free agency year to finally get their big deals. It reminds me a little bit of that in a way, but also just like, I don't know. I'm pro player on a lot of things, but I also always think the teams should do what's in their best interest. Teams should always do what's smartest for team building. And if the Ravens ever paid a veteran running back, I would be sitting here on this podcast saying that was not a good idea. I didn't like the Mark Ingram signing. You can go back, you can go check the receipts on the tweets, and yeah, he was super productive for us. But you know, I just always kind of feel like that money's spent better elsewhere.
But how much of that was just, you know, that year the Ravens had a offensive line that was worth looking into? Because I think that's what the league has become. It's the offensive line that's really there are talented running backs. Like let's not undervalue that. Like Christian McCaffrey, mediocre offensive line, good offensive line, and to some extent maybe a workable bad, if that makes sense, offensive line. He's going to be a talented SOB. But let's take, you know, the famous situation with a certain Le'Veon Bell who decides to hold out.
Look at Najee.
An offensive line built around him for him. He goes to the Jets, who are under Adam Gase, who obviously doesn't know offense. And next thing you know, well, he goes from certified first rounder in the fantasy draft to, oh, don't touch that guy at the 20-foot pole. But I did in 19, and that was a bad idea.
Well, and not only was that him getting a downgraded offensive line, that also coincided with him getting older.
Right.
And so if you are the Steelers, you can say, well, we built this great offensive line for you. Your skills are about to deteriorate.
Right.
Let's move on and let's hand that same offensive line off to James Conner, who I think we all agree James Conner is a middling running back, even at his prime.
Yeah.
James Conner was never a star. He was a starter. He was never a star. He had a couple of very good years, though.
Because right now in Arizona, he's more the pass-catching guy, I've noticed. It's not really a ground and pound with him.
It's still kind of – he's a little bit of everything, but he's not a lot of anything.
Right. But I will say this for just, you know, let's go on the younger side. Like last year on my fantasy team, I had Joe Mixon, and he was out for 2-3 games with some sort of weird injury. I can't remember. My team was bad, so I gave up at like week 5. But I remember I was lucky. I got the guy off waivers. I think it was
P. Ryan.
P. Ryan, and he's putting up the same numbers. I'm like, is P. Ryan just this elite and we just never noticed, or is it because again the Bengals realizing they had a basically a Hall of Fame potential with Burrow, and they almost killed him in his first year? Oh, let's make an offensive line for once.
Well, and I think it's one of those things that Tanner, my co-host on the ADP, says that if you give any viable running back in the NFL the same amount of carries, you're going to get roughly the same production over the course of a season. And I do agree with that. I think on the individual plays are where you can really see the difference. I think that Super Bowl with the Bengals, Joe Mixon was off the field, right? And Samaje Perine had the carry. I want to say it was a carry from shotgun, and he didn't make one guy miss, and they got tackled short, right? Isn't that what happened? I'm trying to remember. It's 2 years ago already. But I remember that Mixon was off the field. Perine didn't make the play. I feel like Mixon would have made the play. And that's where I think it's really hard on these running backs is that they are talented players. They are better. Joe Mixon is better than Samaje Perine.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
On individual circumstances, on individual plays, that shows up. But once you extrapolate it over the course of 200 carries, those little things get missed because, on that play, Joe Mixon would have just turned 2 yards into 4 yards.
Right.
But 4 yards meant the first down. And when you look at the box score at the end of the year, you would have just seen 2 more yards. Right. And, a lot of the analytics would have just said 2 more yards. A lot of things don't phase into that. And I don't necessarily think you should pay players if the difference is 2 yards on the occasional play. I don't think that's necessarily a shame on the team for not doing that. If I can pay $2.50 for Samaje Perine and it's going to be 80% of my $10 Joe Mixon, then I think I'm just going to pay $2.50 for Samaje Perine. Ryan, your team has like the golden example of the running back who just defies and breaks all the rules. They're the ones that paid him and it worked out well. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, you mentioned we had the golden example, the king, if you will, to give him his proper title. The offensive line thing, here's the crazy thing. So Henry last year behind that offensive line, which you lost Taylor Lewan in week 1. And he had Dennis Daly, who I swear might have been the worst left tackle I've ever seen play in my lifetime. And he ran behind that offensive line and had well over 1,500 yards.
Right.
So, I think Henry is built different. I mean, literally he is. He is 6'3", 250. I'm probably, giving him a little bit less on those two fronts.
I mean, he is listed at 6'3", 247. I'm looking at it right now.
Okay. Well, I gave him 3 extra pounds.
Ryan's not
I'm sure he appreciates that. Henry is really different compared to these others where I really wonder how it's going to take a toll on it. I think that's going to be the interesting storyline for me with him this year is just seeing how many carries can he take. But if you got a guy like Perine that you can get for a little bit less than say a Mixon in that example, you go for Perine, and if you get some good production out of him, then you go for it.
It's a lot less, by the way. Looking at it right now, Perine signed a 2-year, $7.5 million deal with the Broncos, and $3 million of that was guaranteed. Just to use as a comparison, Miles Sanders, who I think is right around the Joe Mixon territory as a player, Miles Sanders signed a 4-year, $25.4 million with 11 guaranteed. So that's a very large difference if you're choosing to pay a Miles Sanders or a Samaje Perine. That's a huge difference.
Incredibly huge difference.
One thing. Oh, go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, this, but the running back market, I mean, I mean, you wonder how it's going to be with somebody like a Bijan who just came in to the league.
He
You
hasn't
wonder
even
how it's
played.
going to treat him.
It's amazing. He hasn't even played it down yet. And one of the first things that happens on draft night is, because I agree, you do think, well, gosh, is he going to get paid? Like, also, not to mention, right now, Bijan Robinson is a top 10 paid NFL running back.
Ooh,
he is 8th
wow.
in total contract value.
I don't know if this helps the conversation, but the moment anything about like the value of running backs, especially in our lifetime watching the NFL, for some reason this draft lives in my mind rent free. And it's like the first one I brought up just to make sure I got the players right. The 2005 NFL draft, where in the first 5 picks, there were 3 running backs, 2 of which were from the same school. You had Ronnie Brown from Auburn go to the Dolphins at 2. You had Cedric Benson from Texas go to the Bears at 4. And then Cadillac Williams, bringing back some memories, from Auburn as well, going to the Bucks. And only one of those had a Pro Bowl. And that was a time, again, 2005, those were the days when, if you're in the first 5 picks of the draft, God, even the first 10, you were making money. It wasn't the structured contracts of now. It's like, no, you go Alex Smith went number 1 that year, and I definitely remember him like telling the 49ers, you're paying me or I'm not playing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're talking $60 million for the first overall pick.
Right.
And one thing, Peter, with that too, I would almost guarantee that the Ronnie Brown Pro Bowl year is the Wildcat year, right?
Exactly.
Like the gimmick offense what led to that.
Yeah.
But even if they were good, like, right? Because I mean, gosh, even if they were good, they still would just had short shelf lives, though. Like Ronnie Brown. Gosh, what was it? 2010,
2008 Pro Bowl. You are correct, and that was it.
Yeah, and just think about it, literally a year after with Reggie Bush too, and remember the Reggie Bush race that was going on. Like,
right? Yeah.
I don't know. I think one thing that's interesting to look at in comparison to is today Cole Kmet got paid, the tight end for the Bears, and Cole Kmet's new deal is a 4-year, $50 million deal with $22.8 million guaranteed at signing. Looking around, the Derrick Henry, which the Derrick Henry signed his deal a couple years ago now. Henry had a 4-year, $50 million deal, $25 million guaranteed at signing. So, like, and that's a tight end. I'm not comparing anyone to quarterbacks or wide receivers or edge rushers. Like, that's a tight end that we're comparing him to here. That's just Cole Kmet compared to Derrick Henry. I'm not necessarily a big fan of paying the running backs. I'm with the team on this. I really am. But, man, if you got to tell me which one do you want on your football team right now for the same exact price, Derrick Henry or Cole Kmet, I think it's got to be Derrick Henry. And even if he's only good for the 1 year of it, then fine, I'll eat the rest. I know I'm getting 1 year. I don't know if I'm getting 1 good year out of Cole Kmet.
I was going to say, from a fantasy standpoint, like $50 million for Cole Kmet, that's I know there's a huge difference between what the teams are doing and what we're doing as fantasy owners, but I'm just like, Cole Kmet with that offense? With Justin Fields?
He is okay to defend Cole Kmet a little bit. He is only 24. It's the Jason Hayward contract, right? Like,
it really is.
That's what these are. Like, and in general, it's fine to make that bet. He's the 8th highest paid tight end. That's perfectly fine. But the fact that the number 8 tight end is equal to the number 3 running back, yeah, it's kind of an issue. But it's an issue. I don't know how you solve it. I don't know if there will be a resolution. Also, the CBA, it doesn't expire for another, 6 years or something like that? Maybe even more than that.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know when you're going to come around to any kind of changes.